First off, Bob, as you know, I'm a huge fan of yours and a big reader of almost, I think, every single one of your books so far. So I really appreciate you jumping on the podcast.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. I appreciate that very much, Brett.
So I know a lot of people that I've trained. Your books have always been ones that I've talked about quite a bit within my training, and when people always ask what to read. But for those that don't know, how would you describe what a go-giver is, where you don't have to read the 200-page book to be able to do it?
Sure. The basic premise of the go-giver, of the term itself, is simply that shifting your focus, and Brett, this is really the key, shifting your focus from getting to giving, understanding that not only is that a more pleasant way of conducting business, it's actually the most financially profitable way as well. Not for some way out there woo-woo type of reason, but it actually makes very practical, very logical sense. Because when you're that person who can take your focus off of yourself and place it on that person, your prospective customer or your current customer, your client, what have you, people feel good about you. They know you're looking to help solve their problems, make their lives, their businesses better, do what you can to add value to their lives. And when that's the case, they want to get to know you. They begin to like you and trust you and want to be part of your life, part of your business, and tell others about you. And of course, everyone wins that way. And you know, it's interesting because when I speak at sales conferences, I'll often, one of the first things I say is that nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money and need to pay your mortgage. They're not going to buy from you even because you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And when you think about it, that's the only reason why anyone should buy from you or from me or from anyone else. But that's really, it's good news, because it means that that sales professional who can place their focus, I mean laser focus, on bringing immense value to that other person, this is the person who creates that environment for the sale and the sustainably long-lasting relationship to develop.
That's awesome. And you know, this book was really important to me while I was making that transition from the corporate executive board, who obviously wrote the book, The Challenger Sale, and transitioning into sports. And, you know, that approach that you talked about, especially in the Go Giver Sells More, was really foundational to my transition to being able to go into sports. And one of the things that you talked about that I think is so true, but I'd love to have you explain it to the consumers, is it is a more pleasant way of selling, and not just a more pleasant way of being sold to for the buyer, but it's a more pleasant way to do sales. So can you explain what you mean when you say it's a more pleasant way to go about sales? Because I think that's such an important point of this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so often sales is, first of all, even in the definition of selling that most people have, right? Because, you know, John David Mann and I both say that selling has so many misperceptions about it. Often people think of selling as trying to convince someone to buy something they don't want or need. And we would say that's not selling, that's called being a con artist. Okay, so it's not selling. Selling by definition is really simply discovering what the other person wants, needs, or desires and helping them to get it. Okay, and see, when you look at it that way, it's a totally different way of conducting business, and certainly creates a much more benevolent context for the buyer. Interesting is that the old English root of the word sell was selan, which meant to give. So when you're selling, you're literally giving. Now, someone might say, well, wait a second, Burg, isn't that just semantics, selling, giving? What are you giving when you're selling? And I would say that, and again, let's just say you're about to do a presentation, you're having an interview conversation with a prospective client. You're selling. So what exactly are you giving? I suggest you're giving that person time, attention, counsel, education, empathy, and most of all, exceptional value. So again, rather than seeing sales as that old antagonistic buyer against the seller, one of them wins, one of them loses, what a horrible way of conducting business. What we see is that it's all about the prospective buyer.
Yeah.
That's who it's about. Because our goal as a sales professional is to bring them what they're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, I love that point so much. And I noticed that when you were talking about what are the things that you're giving them, one of the things that you didn't say was actually information. And I think too often, we often view ourselves sometimes as information passers rather than someone that should be looking out for their best interests and their best needs.
Oh, that's a great point.
So you talk about, a big chapter in the Go Giver Sells More that I love. You talk about listening and the importance of listening. Can you talk to our listeners here why listening is so foundational to selling and not necessarily passing off information, but truly listening?
Well, the biggest reason I believe why listening is so vital when it comes to success in terms of selling is because as human beings, we all see the world based on our own unique viewpoint, what I call our belief systems. Our beliefs are, what is a belief? A belief is a subjective truth, right? Subjective truth, not necessarily the truth. It's our truth. It's how we see the world, which sometimes is the truth, but many times it isn't, okay? It's how we see the world. And that belief system was given to us. We did not consciously determine what our belief system would be. It was from the time we were infants and we were taking in information from different sources around us. And by the time we were a little more than toddlers, our basic belief system, our view of life was pretty much formed. So most people grow up and they live their lives really run by an unconscious operating system. They think they're making all sorts of choices based on free will, when in reality, most of the choices are being made within a very specific framework or matrix, if you will, if you ever saw the movie, the original one. Forget about the other. But here's the thing. So we all see the world in a certain way. Well, so does the other person. But here's what really just compounds things. We all tend to believe that the same way we see the world, that the way we see the world is basically the same way everyone else sees the world, which is very intuitive. How could it be anything else? It's all we know. So typically, conflict occurs when two or more people, let's say two people in this case, are seeing the same thing, but from two different viewpoints, without even understanding that they're seeing it from two different viewpoints or premises. This is all a very roundabout way of saying we have no idea what they're understanding and what they're thinking. We think we do. The only when this, when people say, well, step into the other person's shoes, which is one of the points with our book, The Go-Giver Influencer, step into the other person's shoes, which sounds very trite because we've all heard that before. But then you think about it, maybe it's not so easy to do because most of us have different sized feet, right? We literally can't step into their shoes. We figuratively can't step into their minds because we're not them. That's why asking questions is so important, because it's through asking questions and listening. And I mean really listening, not listening in order to sharp angle them into a close, not listening so that you can know where to attack. No, it's listening in order to really, really, truly understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're determining, what they're not really knowing. You know what I'm saying? And if we listen really, really well, and we put our entire, not just our ears, but our eyes, our posture, if we really place our entire being into listening to this person, a couple of things are going to happen. One is we are going to understand what they're looking for, okay, and where they're coming from. Secondly, though, just as importantly, this person's going to feel heard. They're going to feel understood. And it's just a basic element of human nature that we want to be understood by others. And when that's the case, again, now you're 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game. Only this is a game that both of you are going to win.
I think it's really important for a young sales rep, especially to take that advice and then think very specifically, who was a teacher, who was a professor, who was a coach, where you felt really heard. Like, what was it about what they did that made you feel heard? Again, parents, uncles, friends, who are those people that make you feel heard, that make you feel comfortable speaking? And I think a lot of times aim for that environment, like, especially when you're young and you don't know what you're doing, it's hard to do all this stuff, but aim for that feeling more than anything else. And I think you'll find yourself in positions of closing more because people trust you and want to be in that environment than they do anything else.
Great advice. Yeah.
Absolutely. So to that, what are your tricks for listening? Because I think, especially with young sales reps, when we talk about this, they're like, that's easy for you to say. You guys have been selling for a while. I'm trying to think about the next question or remember the next thing that I need to say. And all of a sudden that blocks out 30 seconds of conversation. What are some tips and tricks that you could give, especially younger salespeople, on how to really listen?
Let's go back to one of the first things you said, where the person is saying to you, yes, but I'm trying to think of the next question.
Yeah.
That's an issue, because this is one reason why it's so important to know the questions that you're going to ask. And of course, thank you. And because of the business you're in, regardless of the business you're in, there are certain questions you're always going to ask. You should have those questions. Now, things are different with every person, right? Because people are individuals, but the basic questions you need to ask. And that those questions are going to be the ones that will then take you off into different pathways depending upon their answer. But if you know the basic questions you should know, you're always able to come back. In other words, if you really know the questions and they're part of you, then you never have to be thinking as you're listening, oh, okay, what's the next question? Because see, if you do that, then you're not really focused on the other person. Right? And they'll know that. And you're not able to respond to what they're saying, what they're needing, what they're feeling, what they're not saying, and so yes, that's why it's so important to know the basic questions you would be asking so well that you never have to worry. And people often ask me that question, and they'll say, well, so you're saying it's like we should have these questions scripted? And I'm gonna say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Now, not that it should sound like you're scripted, like, somebody on the telephone when they call and they say, hi, can I speak with Robert Burg, please? And I say, well, this is Bob. How can I? Hello, Robert. How are you? Obviously that's a person reading from a script and it sounds scripted. No, and I want you knowing that script so much that you make it part of your being. And I would use this example for those who have an issue with a script not being authentic, okay? Picture going to a play. Could be a Broadway play, could be your neighborhood play, could be opera, could be anything, okay? And you see these magnificent actors on stage. Do you think that they are simply up there winging it?
No.
Night after night? Of course not. They know it so well that they don't even have to be thinking about it. It's part of them. They used to say that Yul Brynner, who played the king, and the king and he didn't play the king, he was the king.
Yep.
Would be watching a band, go up there on stage. They said the Eagles used to sit in the circle and they would play, and it would be hours and hours they would do it, because they said, we would rather do it now than, look bad, but mess up on stage in front of 50,000 people. Absolutely. And of course, you look at any sports team, look how much practice is put into doing what they do. So it looks like they're just getting up there and that anybody could do it.
To run plays or to run a designed playing style. Like, exactly.
Yeah. And so, I remember they used to say, or actually I think, and I don't remember where I heard this, but Joe Montana and Jerry Rice, when they were a key combination with the 49ers, they were at the Pro Bowl one year, and they were talking about all the practice they put in. and they claimed that that they could run a route, that Rice could run a route, and that they could both do it with their eyes closed
I
and
believe
complete
that.
the pass. And apparently that's what Montana did. He went back to pass, eyes closed. Rice ran a particular route, and boom, they completed the pass. How much practice do you have to do? Yeah, that's not winging it. So yeah, when we say, yes, I want you to know the questions that
Yep.
you would normally ask, and you want to know them so well that you can go off track.
Yep.
Okay, and then come back.
And I would say not just the questions, just know specifically what outcomes you're looking
Oh,
for
okay,
too, right?
yeah, exactly. Yes.
I think you're 100% right. You have to know the questions and know the outcomes that you're
And
aiming for.
and then how, if they answer this, how are you going to? But again, that's fine. There's nothing inauthentic about doing that. That is
No.
exactly how you want to. That's how you serve another human being.
I tell the reps, you're not a bad person. So one of the outcomes that we talk about all the time are the number of tickets in the package, the number of games they're going to go to, and where they sit, right? Like that is what constitutes a ticket package in professional sports. So all of your questions should really focus on answering those questions. And so you should know the questions that help you answer those questions specifically. And again, that doesn't make you scripted. There's a whole conversation that occurs around those questions and follow-up questions that go towards those questions in there. But, I think people are still surprised when I do my training, and especially on the B2B side, I would say, even when I was a senior director or a vice president, when I would take the time to be able to sell on my own, I still had a list of 7 questions that I took into every B2B meeting because I felt, first off, I wanted to show them I was prepared. But second, I felt it was super important for me to be authentic and real within a conversation by having those guidelines, so I knew what I could go to next when I felt like I had exhausted a specific area in the conversation.
Yeah. Again, it's only when you know the fundamentals so well that you can, do them in your sleep, that you're in the position to do the other things outside the fundamentals.
Yeah. So one of the words that I'm sure you guys wrote about it back in 2007, 2010, and all the way that you're writing books about this idea of authenticity, right? And I think, the farther we go, the more prescient both of you look when you talk about authenticity within a sales practice. Because even back then, I remember even at CEB, which is a very progressive sales organization, we were being taught, here's the script, here's what you do, here's what you say, here's the format to follow. Can you talk about what authenticity meant for you guys when you wrote the book, and then how that's continued to play out over the last decade or so, where it's now one of the staples of sales teaching and coaching?
Yeah, and of course, the word authenticity now has gotten so bandied about that it's almost, I won't say it's lost its meaning, but it's got so many different meanings. Nobody really exactly knows what's meant by it anymore. So, here's how we basically did it in the story. And in this part, Deborah Davenport was the main mentor sharing her message. And the law of authenticity says the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. And what she said was that what she learned was that all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and they are very, very important, they're also all for naught if you don't come at it from your true, authentic core. But when you do, when you show up as yourself, day after day, week after week, month after month, people feel very comfortable with you. People feel good about you. People feel safe with you. Why? Because they know who they're getting.
Yeah.
You're consistent. They know it's you who is going to show up. And when that's the case, now they're much more predisposed to like you, to trust you, to want to be in a relationship with you. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, I think, that if it's been proven that being authentic is so much of a better and more profitable way of doing business, why do so many salespeople not show up authentically? And I think the default answer is to say, well, because they're dishonest, or they trying to pull one over, or and of course it's a big world, so there's always somebody like that. We've always got to be aware of that, but I don't think that's usually the case. I'd say 99 times out of 100, when someone doesn't show up authentically, it's really nothing more than that they don't have the self-confidence to show up that way. Because let's face it, it's very difficult to show up authentically when you don't recognize your own value and when you don't feel you have anything authentic to show up for. And I want to look at this on a couple levels, if it's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
One is that I think as human beings, there are two types of authentic value we're talking about. One is just intrinsic value. In other words, just by being human, by showing up, we bring value to the table. We all have human value. I think that we also have what I call market value. And I define market value as that combination of strengths, traits, talents, and characteristics that allow us to add value to others, value to the marketplace as a whole, value to our individual prospective customers and clients, to do that in such a way that we will be financially rewarded for it. And we all have these, what Mike Littman coined, assets of value, okay? Now, sometimes though, it's really difficult to see them. Why? Because we're human beings. And as human beings, we're so emotionally involved with ourselves, it can be very difficult to recognize those strengths as being so significant.
Yeah.
And when we don't recognize these, this is when we undersell, we underprice, we are too easily negotiated down, and so forth. So we've got to be, and this is why, you know, if you're a sales leader listening to this, and or you're one of the sales team members, make sure if you're the sales leader, you're making sure your sales team knows their strengths.
100%.
So important. And if you're a salesperson on someone else's team, go to your sales leader, go to your sales manager, and help them to help you to understand those strengths. I also love what Scott Adams, the creator of the Dilbert cartoon, has written some wonderful books, including how to fail at almost anything, at almost everything, and still succeed, which was a great book. And he talked about the talent stack. And the way he described it is when you don't have any one talent that's like amazingly super, you're not Steve Jobs, you don't have that one creative talent that's so amazing it will take you to, right? But and maybe you're not the best basketball player in the world, or not the best now, but you've got a number of talents that are really good, that together make you very, very valuable.
Yep.
It's the ball player who isn't necessarily going to hit 325 with 40 home runs, but they're the kind of guy that can play three positions. They have a good baseball sense. They can steal the base. They play great. They have these different talents that make them very, very valuable. And so whether it's that one amazing strength that you have, or that talent stack, that several of them that kind of go together, you've got to discover what that is. Because when you don't recognize it and value it yourself, others aren't going to place as high a value on you as they could. And can I make one more quick point about authenticity? I think sometimes people look at the word authentic and they use it as an excuse for not growing. This is just who I am, take it or leave it, which, is a really good philosophy, by the way, if you don't want to have any friends and you're not looking to be successful in business. But assuming you are, it's a really lousy strategy, lousy outlook. It's sort of like the person who says, well, I have anger issues and I yell a lot, and if I were to act any differently, that wouldn't be authentic of me. And of course, that's hogwash. That's baloney. It simply means this person has an authentic problem that he needs to authentically work on in order to become a better, higher, more effective, authentic version of himself. So, I always like to say, don't use authenticity as an excuse to stay where you are. Use it as an impetus to grow into your true, highest authentic nature.
I loved all of that. And I remember it was in Daniel Pink's book, The Sell is Human. He talked about this study where a couple professors went to Hollywood and they were listening in on script pitch meetings. And they were looking for, when they bought the script, what were the characteristics that stood out. And the one that was so interesting to me was quirkiness, which I think is the same way. And they don't mean quirkiness as weirdness. They meant quirkiness as how memorable were you? Like when they got off the phone, did they just get off the phone with someone from the San Jose Sharks, or did they just get off the phone with Brett from the San Jose Sharks? And I know that sounds really small and trivial, but that matters in a conversation. That matters to the person you're purchasing from. And I couldn't agree more with something that you said, that self-confidence is by far the biggest way to be able to get a rep into that true, authentic self. How does a rep gain self-confidence? I think it's such an important question, because I know from me, when I've struggled as a salesperson, it hasn't been from that tact or ability or learning about sales. It really has come from a place of self-confidence where I felt less than or not qualified. And that's when I struggle the most. And so how do you gain self-confidence? I know that's such a weird question, but I think it's such an important one in sales.
No, it's a great question. And I think part of self-confidence, a big part of self-confidence, is understanding both your strengths and weaknesses. Now, I would even divide weaknesses into three different types, okay? There are the weaknesses that you can ignore because they absolutely don't make a difference, okay? Just to give an example, a non-business example of a weakness of mine that doesn't matter that I can ignore is I don't run long distances well. Okay. Now, being 62 with absolutely no desire to run a marathon, that's a weakness I just disregard, right? Yep. Now, then there are the weaknesses that you need to mitigate. In business, that might be, for example, in my own experience, I'm not really great when it comes to numbers, bookkeeping, things like that. Okay. But I can't just ignore that, obviously. So I learned to be competent enough with it. Yep. That when I hire others to handle that, I still know, what I'm doing. Okay. So that's something that had to be mitigated. An example outside of business, let's say, would be, I don't like to work out and I love junk food. Okay. And so that has to be mitigated or it'd be very unhealthy and worse, Yep. So I have a trainer that I've used for the last 10 years. She comes every single morning, shows up the same time at 6:30. I know she's going to be there 5 days a week. We work out. She prepares all my healthy meals for the day. So all I have to do is heat them up. I know what I can eat, what I can't. And I don't keep Oreos in the house, right? Because I know me well enough to know that I would.
You'll be gone.
So I'm not a health fanatic by any means. When I say fanatic in this case, I mean that in a good way, but I'm certainly not a health fanatic, but I've mitigated that weakness of mine. I've created the context where I'm not going to let myself go. Then there are the weaknesses that we need to change and turn into strengths. That would be that example of the person who we talked about with the anger issue. Now, about 25 years ago, one of my mentors, Charlie Tremendous Jones, sent me a book. And it was a book by Benjamin Franklin, one of our country's founders, of course, who was a brilliant man and very much an inventor. And at the beginning of Dr. Franklin's career, he found that there were certain traits and characteristics of his that were very much weaknesses of his that if he did not actually overcome them and change them into strengths, would certainly hurt his career path. Now, there was no Dale Carnegie course at the time or any other personal development people. So he, being an inventor, invented his own self-improvement course where he would take 13 different character traits. And every week he would work on one, and I mean 100% laser focus on this one particular trait. And at the end of 1 week, he'd move on to the second one. And then at the end of the third one, he'd complete the 13. Then he'd go back and do it again. Well, 13 times 4 are 52, right? 52 weeks in a year. So he would go through the course 4 times. And by the end of that year, he totally, so I did the same thing. Again, I'm a good student, right? When I see someone who is successful, I'm going to do what they do. And I use some of the same traits as Dr. Franklin. Others were ones that I needed to. And I'm telling you, I can't think of one thing that changed my life more than that, going through that one course. And I didn't even have to go. I did go the whole year, but you don't even have to. You'll find that you improve on certain things in a very quick period of time. But that's how you get confidence, by taking the action, having a system. What is a system? I define a system as the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. The key being predictability. If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired result of B, you know that all you need to do is A and continue to do A, you'll get the desired result of B. So you have a system. I used Ben Franklin's system, okay? And I did it. And that gave me a lot of confidence, because some of my biggest weaknesses I turned into strengths that are still major strengths of mine today. So I think that's how you get confidence. You take the action that you need to take in order to get that confidence.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of young salespeople, I think it does boil down to product knowledge, right? Like, and your ability to know and understand your product is what
yeah, I mean, as a baseline, you've got to have, that gets you into the game, right? To have the product knowledge. But yeah, without that, boy, it's hard to be confident.
It's because you always hear, I'll always hear, well, I wasn't a fan this isn't my favorite sport. I'm not a huge fan of this sport. And one sales rep that always stood out was actually, he turned that weakness into a strength. And, he was a big football player. This was worked with the Columbus Crew. Some of the guys will know Big Country. He'd be on the phone. He's like, I don't know nothing about this soccer thing, but when those fans are hooting and hollering and cheering, no place I'd rather be. And, it is, especially with sports, it isn't necessarily your intimate knowledge of the players on the field. It's your intimate knowledge of the experience that the fan has by being a part of what you have. And, I don't think you should try to educate yourself about the product. The more education I've had about soccer, the more I become better at selling soccer. But it really is educating about that experience and what it means to be there.
It's for your own confidence to have the product knowledge.
Yeah.
I remember I started out as a sportscaster when I was really young, before I was in television. And I was a sportscaster, a very local radio station. And my first assignment was covering the Boston Marathon. And I knew nothing about marathons. I mean, nothing. Remember, I don't even like running long distances now, never mind even having anything. So I remember what I did back then. Now, again, I'm 62, so this is a long, long time ago, Brett. So what did I do? I didn't go on the internet, because who knew about that? I went to the library and I learned everything I could. And then I remember speaking to people at school who I knew were runners, and they would explain to me how just the way you moved your arms, and so forth. And I learned everything I could about running, about marathons, about this and that. So when it was time for me to do the reports, I never really used any of that information, but I had so much confidence in that I knew at least what I needed to know, that I could then focus on what I needed to relay, to the listeners.
Absolutely. I was going to ask this, and I didn't know the right time, but I want to hear, because I think this is a good point for it too, as you start talking about that. What would you want out of a salesperson trying to sell you tickets to a pro sports team? So don't know what your favorite sport is, don't know what your favorite team is, but
I love baseball. Yeah. And Miami. I grew up as a Red Sox fan, growing up outside the Boston area. But I've been in about an hour and a half out north of Miami since I think '88 or something like that. So the Marlins were an expansion team, and I've been in love with them through thick and thin. I'm a Dolphins fan too, and so I love baseball and football, but baseball is really my my sport.
Same with me. What would you want to see out of a sales rep, in terms of, I think, their approach to you, the conversation, the dialogue, the follow-up, and again, we could just read your book, but I think, it wasn't written specifically for sports. So taking that vantage point into it.
Well, I'm a relationship buyer. Okay. So somebody who is going to sell me on anything substantial is probably going to have to create a relationship with me.
Absolutely.
Okay? Yeah. I mean, and that's how I am. Now, I'm also a quick decision maker, though. Okay. There are different types of people. There are relationship people who can't make up their mind, and that's part of the thing. And there are relationship people who make up their mind right away. I'm either going to buy or I'm not.
Yep.
There are those people who are, they don't want a relationship. They just want you to kind of get right down to it. And they're also the kind of people that will give you their decision quickly, but there are also those very direct people like that who won't make a decision quickly. So there's those, to me, I see those kind of four various, and of course there's many differentials within those, and people tend to have more than just one, but there's one pretty much dominant style that I think most people have as buyers. And mine is definitely, the relationship part with the salesperson. Again, that's when it's something substantial. Obviously, when there's nothing riding on it, you don't need the relationship to buy something.
So when you say, because we face this in sports a lot, especially when we sell B2B, the B2C sales, when we're selling to ticket buyers, as you were just basically elocuting, it tends to go very fast, right? It tends to be like, here's the ticket package, here's what you said, here's a ticket package, make a decision. Sometimes it can be a first call close. Sometimes it's within 2 or 3 calls. But a lot of reps struggle on the B2B side because that all of a sudden becomes a more extensive process. And it takes a long time for sales reps to really transition into being able to sell B2B, just because of how quick a lot of times that B2C conversation has gone. Can you talk, what are important things to keep in mind as you start transitioning from a short sales cycle to a longer sales cycle that reps need to be thinking about the whole time?
Well, remember that just as no one's going to buy from you because you need the money, they're not going to buy from you quickly because you want them to.
Yes.
They're going to buy when they want to. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, do certain things to make it so that they want to buy quicker. And I'm not talking about lowering price. I don't want to get into that because I want you selling on high value, not low price. But but I'm just saying that when you really discover what that person wants, needs, and desires, once you can communicate to them that that's what they're going to have, is basically when they feel the value is here and the price is here. And when I say price, I'm not just talking about, I'm talking really about cost. Price is one form of cost. There's price cost, there's time cost, there's lost opportunity cost, there's aggravation cost, right? But we'll just use the word price for that, when the value's up here and the price is down here, they're going to buy right now. When it's like this, then it's different. And the time that it takes to keep developing that value is key. But so, I'd say it depends on the person, of course, but once they know that the value exceeds the price they're being asked to pay, that's when they're going to buy.
Absolutely. And I think for reps, it's important to hear that, understand there's no such thing as a check-in call, right? Like the check-in call has to go away. We have to be building value in every communication that we have, the longer the sales process goes. Because I think we tend to actually start to erode some of that trust they have if we start to feel a little like, hey, you made a decision yet? And so to that point, one of my favorite questions to ask people is, I think there's a very thin but important line between earning people's business and being desperate for a sale. I think it's really critical that we show people that we are willing to go earn their business, but at the same point, we can't do it in a way that, I always say, desperation is a stinky cologne. Like it's ugly. How do you draw that line between earning business and desperation?
Well, I call this posture. Okay, I'm not talking about physical posture. I'm talking about posture that you can define as when you care, but not that much. Okay. In other words, I guess a more mature definition would be of posture would be that it's a lack of emotional attachment to a specific result. And this is key. It means that you prefer it, but you don't emotionally demand it in order to be happy and have peace of mind. Okay. Attachment is something that you absolutely must have. And when that's the case, that shines through. That doesn't shine through, it comes through. Okay. And I often say, nobody wants to do business with someone who seems to need them too much. So there's 2 ways of having posture. Okay, this lack of emotional attachment to a specific desire. One is by understanding that ultimately, whether or not that person buys from you, ultimately it's up to them, not up to you. Now, this sounds as though it's disempowering, but it's actually not. It's the opposite. It's very empowering because it means that you know that so long as you did your job and brought everything to the table you possibly could, then you can just let the results go. You can let go of any attachment to the results, and you never have to feel badly. Now, people will say, oh, are you saying you're not responsible for it? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. And one thing I learned from one of my great mentors, one of my great sales mentors, Bill Gove, he said, you're responsible to people, not for people.
I love that.
You're responsible to them to give them the opportunity to do business with you. You're responsible to them to show up, to be prepared, to know the right questions, to be able to answer them, to be able to do everything you can do, but you're not responsible for their life's decisions. When you have that kind of posture, that actually makes you more attractive to that other person, because they see that you're someone who's just not attached. That yes, of course you'd prefer them to buy, but that if they don't, it's okay. You're able to kind of say, when they say no, you're able to say next. Now, you don't say next out loud, of course. That could be a little rude, but it's obvious that you're fine with it. You're okay. And when that's the case, they're often now, they want to know why you're so okay with it, right? It's like, what's this person? This person must really be successful because, while they're very professional, they don't seem to care that I'm not. They obviously have other people ready to buy. Yep. And they're now maybe more interested, or even if they're not, that's okay. Because if you can display posture one time, you can continue to display it. But here's the other thing, the other way to have posture, because what I just talked about was internal posture. There's also external posture. External posture is the result of having so many qualified prospects on your list who you've earned the right to talk to, that you never have to worry about any one person saying no.
What is it? Because I think this is really important, and this is one of the things I struggle with, especially with younger salespeople as I'm teaching them or coaching them or doing training on them. They think just because they picked up the phone or they had a conversation that person becomes a qualified prospect. What to you is a qualified prospect in your pipeline?
Well, someone who has shown in some way that they are qualified, both in terms of need and want, and obviously can afford it. I call it the marketing bridge. Do they need it? Do they want it? Can they afford it? Now, do they need it? Great, but if they need it and don't want it, well, it doesn't matter if they can afford it, they're not buying. Now, with sports, it's usually more a matter of want than need, although need can also come in when there's other reasons for them wanting a package, but let's just say mostly it's want. Yep. And now, if they want it, wonderful. Can they afford it? Well, that's a different story a lot of times. And which package can they afford? And if not, none, then they're not a qualified prospect. It doesn't mean they're not a nice person. It just means they're not a prospect. So I think that's really what it comes down to. So we need to know that the people who are in our pipeline, for lack of a better word, are those people who are in fact qualified.
And I would say even there, we can still construct a need, right? Like, being a divorced father, being able to spend more time with their daughter by being able to take them to a game.
Part of being a salesperson is helping someone. It's the insights you provide them, helping them see something that they ordinarily didn't know. Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. Of course, absolutely.
But I think as because we know information better, because we know exactly what our ticket packages are, I love the want it, need it, afford it, because I think a lot of times, a lot of our reps rush to try to qualify afford it before they even start thinking about need it or want it or caring about need it or want it.
And you brought up I want to continue with that great point you brought up about people not knowing that they need or want it for what it can do, and the insights that a salesperson can provide to help them see that. Richard Weilman, who does a lot of wonderful work in the marketplace of the niche market of financial advisors, he has a great suggestion, and that is because remember we were talking about how we see things from our own viewpoint. So a lot of times we don't know what other people are thinking in terms of the benefits they see from doing business with us. So what he says is meet up for coffee or for lunch or whatever with your best clients, okay? And ask them, what is it about doing business, either with me, with the team, with the company, what have you, that is really the reason that you see as the biggest benefit? And a lot of times they will give you reasons that you didn't even know yourself because you wouldn't have thought about them. See, when we talk about value as opposed to price, right? Price is a dollar figure, it's a dollar amount, right? But value is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. What is it about this thing? What is it about this particular package, okay, that has so much worth or value to another human being that they will exchange substantial money for it and be ecstatic that they did? So, but remember, value is always in the eyes of the beholder. It's what they believe is of value about this, not what you believe is of value about it. And so when you ask them, a lot of times they'll come up with reasons that you hadn't even thought of, because to you, you wouldn't find it of value.
Nope.
Right? But they would. So now you know that when you're talking to another prospect and you're helping them to kind of see that there's a need or a want that they don't know, you can be asking around that particular area to see if it's something that might be of value to them. They never would have thought about it had you not asked it, which is why I loved your point from earlier. And you wouldn't have thought about it had you not asked others who are your good clients.
And that's so unbelievably true in sports, because we have a lot of young people trying to sell season tickets, fundamentally a product that they can't really afford. which
Right.
becomes which is why it becomes so important, as we talked about earlier, like listening, asking people, trying to make sure they understand that. Anyone that sees my sales training knows that, and I won't tell the whole story, but like I talk about the funeral home experience that I had when I started selling tickets when I was at the NBA league office and starting the team in Erie, and just being at a funeral home to pick up a check for season tickets that our owner's friend was doing. And I just remember asking the head of the funeral home, like, how on planet Earth can you be using tickets? Like, I don't have a very direct line to understand how a funeral home could benefit from season tickets. Then he went on to tell the story about how he uses it to kind of close the loop with the people who died and their families, and, wanting to make them to their lives a little bit better on the back end of all this, and being able to use that and see the value of it through sports. And by the time he ended up getting talking, like, I like all the goosebumps on my arm were standing up, because man, what an incredibly powerful story. And that's not just helped me sell funeral homes, but that's helped me sell other businesses.
Oh, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And even other funeral homes, like I got a great story from another rep who said, I sold to a funeral home using your story, but they didn't buy for that reason. And I was like, oh, really? What did they buy for? And they were like, well, they understood and they appreciated the story, but their biggest problem wasn't necessarily getting people in. It was keeping staff there, because it's such a morbid industry. So using this as a way to show that their staff, that they're willing to invest in them and work with them. And like, that's just like, man.
What a beautiful story. And that's so great to use in your teachings, because you've seen 3 different utilizations of the same basic premise, same basic principle.
Especially on something where you just would not connect the connection.
No.
And I think that becomes valuable, and I know for me that spurred me more and more to make sure that I understand that why for each one of those businesses. I know it's such a corny expression, what is that why, but it is an important thing. And I think it goes back to a lot of your teachings of caring enough about that other person to be able to figure that out before your own self-interests get into play about, I need to close this person, how do I get to the information, and all of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
So the last question I wanted to ask, because I've been watching as you've been talking about this on social media and your platforms, about this idea of tact. And I think this is such an important, I don't know if you had timed this or done this, but I think this concept right now for sales reps to be thinking about, especially amid the COVID crisis and now absolutely what's going on in the broader scope of the universe, with all the protests and stuff, this idea and this thought of tact when you're speaking to people. And I love how you're using it in such an empowering way, as opposed to oh my gosh, shirking responsibility way. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is such a beautiful and perfect time to be thinking about that.
Oh, well, thank you. Um, my dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition because to me, to speak with tact, to speak tactfully, oftentimes takes more strength than we can ever imagine, especially when people say things or do things, whether purposely or just unconsciously, that upset us, or that would, or they say things that are just out of line or whatever, or those times we need to be able to critique or correct, or to be able to, teach, to what have you. And yet we're dealing with human beings who are, not logical by nature. As human beings, we're very emotion driven and very ego driven. And so it's not a matter of just, stating the facts and that's it. That's not enough to make people either, change their mind, or as Zig Ziglar used to say, make new decisions based on new information, because people generally don't want to change their mind. So really, tact is a way of communicating an idea to someone that they ordinarily would not be receptive to, but doing so in such a way that not only are they not defensive toward you and resistant to your ideas, but they're open to you and more receptive to your ideas. And, a lot of times it's nothing more than just thinking before you speak, and asking yourself the question, how is what I'm about to say, how is that most likely to touch that person? Is it something that's likely to offend their ego and make them resistant? Or can I say it in such a way that they don't feel pressure, but instead they understand I'm coming from a position of friendship and a position of help and assistance? So I think, tact and its cousin, empathy, right? In which we really don't necessarily understand their feelings because we're not them, but we understand they're feeling something, and that this something is distressful to them, and that we're there to help them work through it. So I think when we communicate with tact and empathy, again, we just separate ourselves from practically everyone else they know, and we're able to communicate our ideas in a way that they're much more likely to accept them.
I remember seeing at a conference once a great slide that said, "Sell unto others as you would have them sell unto you." And that's one of the things that I've tried to stick with me since that, is just trying to understand, how do I make sure that I communicate my point, but in a way that is going to have real meaning for that person. So for those that don't necessarily understand what this looks like, what would be a specific example of using tact in a conversation?
Well, let's say you're a sales leader, sales manager, talking to one of your salespeople. And this is a person who, has really got some great potential. They're a little sensitive though, and you want to be able to give them an idea of something without them feeling put down. Yep. And it might be that you say to this person, Pat, I'm loving what you're doing. Your potential is some of the best I've ever seen. If I had an idea how you could actually improve even to another level, thus even increasing your income more, would you like me to share that with you? Okay. Yeah. Now you might say, well, but you're the boss, just tell them. Well, that's fine. That's compliance, but that typically doesn't have the kind of long-term and often even short-term result as if you get the person to buy into your idea. They're much more likely to buy into your idea when you framed it in such a way, I love so much of what you're doing, or, you have so much potential and I see so many great things you're doing. If there was a way, or if I had a way that, that you could, and again, I'm just coming up with something off the cuff, it's obviously not, if there was a way you could actually take your performance to the next level of success, would you want to? Well, now if this person says, well, yeah, sure, I'd want to know that. Now they've bought in. Now they've said, oh, okay, yeah, what is it?
I love that so much, because you can't do it without them, right? Whether you're trying to sell to them or you're being a leader with them. I mean, if you're in this position, no matter what, you can't do it without them. As the point you made earlier, like, we can't sell them something if they're not ready to buy it. Like if they're not willing or ready to be able to purchase it, we can't hit our sales quotas if our reps aren't performing to the level that they need to perform to. And, we have this idea that we need to do all of it ourselves. a lot of times, or teach them the way I did it, or talk to them the way that I know will be successful for them, with the fundamental misunderstanding that, well, we can't do this literally without them.
Right. Exactly.
Listen, Bob, I can't appreciate more the amount of time you've given, and the thought you've given to this. And I'm really, really excited to be able to put this out and see the response. So thank you so much. This is, I know this sounds very tact, but I've read you since the Go Giver and the Go Giver. So I think I've had this copy since the first day
Wow.
it came out in 2010.
Thank
So
you.
I'm very appreciative of you jumping on, and I'm sure the reps and the managers are genuinely going to appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. I wish everyone well. And Brett, thank you. It's been great getting to know you over Twitter and social media and so forth. I know you're doing so many terrific things. So thank you so much for having me on.
We're trying, and we appreciate it for sure. Thanks, Bob.